Okay, I hope you found that interesting, because I thought it was pretty kind of them and thorough to talk a fair bit about the midwives, particularly since we read that in Mujeres to Theology, right? There was a fair amount about Shifra and Pua. Let's start as always, though, and see where you were this week. Were there things about the text that intrigued you or compelled you or bothered you, or none of the above, but something else you'd just like to share?
I was intrigued by actually not this, the piece about the Second World War and how the Danes were forced to wear, everybody wore the star, so you wouldn't know who was Danish and who wasn't. That was pretty clever.
I was unfamiliar with that story before this video.
Well, I think it's interesting that the speaker touched upon the role of women, and I think she could have. It probably wouldn't have been appropriate, but she could have expanded that all the way up to Mary, because it seems at very critical points in the history of Judaism, there is a female there to kind of help it along.
Yeah, we've seen that a bit already, haven't we? Right, there's a few times, and in this story too, not just Shifra and Pua, but there's that weird story where Moses's wife saves his life when God comes to kill him. It's a bizarre story.
And I don't quite understand why he was going to do that.
Well, no one understands. That's a bizarre story. I mean, some people, this is the kind of thing you learn in I guess in a doctoral setting, is like, oh, that's like a desert spirit, and Moses has to contend with the desert spirit, but by the time it gets to the Bible, turns out it's God. Yeah, I just, like, to me, that's just, I don't know, not particularly interesting or helpful, but that's what you do in graduate studies. Yeah.
I was also fascinated by how many times the well comes up in biblical stories.
Yeah, and maybe it's helpful to know that when we talk about the Torah or the Pentateuch, I mean, really, it's only on 5 scrolls, because if it were on 1 scroll, it would be too long. So if our Jewish brothers and sisters imagine this as 1 block, not 5 blocks. And to be fair, the first 10, 20 chapters of Exodus flow right out of Genesis, right? I mean, they really just keep right on going. And it's only a new book or a new scroll, like I said, because animals aren't that long. So you run out of animal skin and you need to start on another one. John, please.
Yeah, I have a bunch of things. First, something you just said. Is there any difference between the Torah and the Pentateuch? Are they exactly the same thing, or what's the difference?
Yeah, they're referring to the same content, albeit the Pentateuch is the Greek word, means 5 books, and Torah would be the Hebrew word for those same 5 books.
So no difference in terms of content.
No content difference, no.
Okay.
The one subtle difference, John, is that the word Torah sort of pretends like all 5 are one, and you get a little more parsing out into the 5 books. It's very, very mild, and it's not like.
Good morning.
That's all.
Anderson with Kirsten. And this is my service dog, Chris.
I have read these books, or these sentences numerous times, and even in the commentary in the our reading guide, if you will, they still don't answer anything. And that's what and it has to do with the very first plague. God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Now, even in the, as I said, the write-up in Disciple, it still, to me, doesn't answer anything, or I don't even think they try. So I've never been able to come to terms with that, because it seems to me that God should have softened his heart so that the Hebrews were released and the Pharaoh's Egyptians didn't have to go through the plagues. Anyway, that's something that I'd like to pursue a little bit. I've got a couple of other things coming back to what we just listened to. Thought that I had was in current Jewish or Hebrew life, what is the role of women? Is there any equality, or more so today than, say, historically? And that's all I'll say for now. I have one more thing, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, so let's take these on as a group. I don't want to like oversplit hairs here, but my recollection in reading the story is that Pharaoh hardens his heart first, and then God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And remind you, right, and Eric mentioned this really briefly on Sunday, that like your center of your being in Greek is your heart, but that's not true in Hebrew. The center of your being is your neck. So hardening your heart is really like choosing to be stubborn. Your heart is like the center of your will, so he becomes intractable. I actually think I don't know if I've got a good answer about like why God participates in that, because the story does seem clear that God participates in it. I can say Pharaoh did it first, but the fact that God does it all at all, I don't know, is confusing. Here's what I'll say though. A careful read of the story, God gives Moses 3 things to do. Pour water on the ground, it'll become blood. Put your hand in your shirt, it'll become boiled. Throw your snake down, your staff, it'll become a snake, right? And when you read the story, Moses does 1 of the 3. So I may be overreading, but I wonder, what if Moses had done the other 2 things like he'd been told? Would Pharaoh have, from the get-go, backed off? Because when you read the story, you notice the magicians can actually do the same stuff until you get to the 3rd plague, right? The magicians can make blood, and the magicians can turn their staff into a snake, but maybe they can't give themselves boils. So maybe that would have been it. And Pharaoh looks to the magicians on plague 1, and they're like, we can do that. And Pharaoh looks to the magicians on plague 2, and they're like, we can do that. And then Pharaoh's hardened his heart so that on plague 3, when the magician's like, this is a god, Pharaoh's like, already made his mind up. And I think what's helpful, John, for me, is like, the story is not great. So the story is kind of yucky. And if you want to watch how this plays out, Ridley Scott made a movie called Gods and Kings, in which God appears as a very petulant child, right? Who's set on ruining the Egyptians, which seems kind of tough. But I think you could read the story that way. On the other hand, if I'm stepping back from the story a little more figuratively, sometimes I'll make my mind up to my own ruin. And I like to think I'm data-driven, but sometimes I'll ignore the data because I'm so sure of something. And this is that story.
Well, Mike, even in this story, as you just said, God expresses anger, I think, with Moses. And so here we have a God who has emotions.
Yeah.
So the question is, does that, in a sense, if we are made in his likeness, we have emotions, he has emotions, and sometimes perhaps he doesn't act as benevolently as he could, and in some cases he has been, if not chastised, he has been questioned about it in earlier readings.
And I think that's always a good question, John, we have to raise. Is this actually describing God as God is, or as we conceive of God? And so, like, I'm going to go on a limb and say, I'm not really convinced God has emotions. But I am convinced that because we describe God that way, which is called an anthropomorphism, right? And in this story, God gets really angry and God really wants a lot of revenge. And there's a whole lot of not just violence, but a lot of collateral damage, right? There's no way all of the Egyptians are these cruel, calculating, evil people, and they are going to suffer. And so, I think we could hear that as describing who God actually is, or we could hear that describing how we conceive of God so we can figure that out. I don't know. I'm probably very liberal for having said that, but such is me.
Well, if God is supposed to know everything in advance, I mean, supposed to, if the statement goes, he knows you before you were born, and if he knows everything that you're going to do, then this story makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, it's just really clear that the authors of the Torah didn't think that God knew everything.
Now, is there any significance to the number 10?
Yeah, you got 10 digits.
No, but I mean, like 40 days.
Yeah, 10 shows up a lot. And I think it's because you got 10 digits. I think that's why. A long time ago, someone in England had 12, which is why there's 12 inches to a foot. It's preposterous. Somebody must have had 6 fingers on each hand. But the rest of us have got, 10 total. And 10 is one of those numbers that shows up in the Bible. Like the way Jewish people count is like 1, 2, 3, 7, 10, 12, 40. That's kind of like how the number system goes. So
our number system is based on 10.
It is, and curiously enough, the Babylonian number system is a septagesimal system, so it's based on 60, and you get 60 if you count all of your knuckles on your fingers and toes, in addition to the digits themselves. That's really bizarre, but that works that way. So Tim, nobody quite knows why they decided 10 is a magic number, but 10 in the Bible is a magic number. It is. There are more than 10 gods in Egypt. That's important to know. So some people will say this is God taking on all the gods of Egypt. And you can read that in because sure enough, the firstborn is a major god, the sun is a major god, the Nile is a major god. Like those are like the big 3, and they show up within the 10. But there are more than 10. So maybe they just represent the 10 God has decided to show mastery over. I mean, in some ways you can read this story with the plagues. This is God showing in the land of Egypt, where Egyptian gods should have territorial rights, they are inferior to the power of this other God. So it's not God versus Pharaoh, it's God versus the gods of Egypt.
That kind of makes sense as to why the reading or this book goes through all of those I can't think of the term anyway. Because plagues. Thank you very much. Because it goes through, at least in the write-up, it goes through each one of those plagues and describes the gods that have been basically affected or canceled by what the plague did.
I think I want to go back to your question though, and I don't want to have the last word by any means, John. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but like there are times in my own life, and sure, when I read history books, where like, forgive me for using a phrase from Daniel, like the writing's on the wall, and I still will double down and do the dumb thing. And like you see people doing that throughout history, including this Pharaoh guy, and you're like, wow, are people that dumb, or is like fate involved? You know, like sometimes we do something so dumb that it is almost like some larger spirit to our dumbness. And so like, is that God hardening our heart? I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm trying to pontificate on that. Like, I don't know. Sometimes you know, in my like anger and self-righteousness and just foolishness, it almost feels like there's something outside myself hardening my heart, because I'm normally not that dumb, but sometimes I'm really dumb.
Well, Mike, I think we all do it to an extent. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've said, don't put that cup up there because you're going to knock it down. And I put it up there anyway, and I knock it down.
And let's talk about also our driving habits and how we know better than to do other things while we drive. And some of you may be really good about that, and I'm not always good. Sometimes I turn on the radio. I mean, like, among other things that I do that are much worse than turning on the radio. And it's like, I don't know. I choose not to blame God for that. You know, I'm not, but I also see, like, again, like you look at, like, well, Lila mentioned in the chat, like, there is this weird spirituality about masking, and it's sort of like, how is something so relatively inconvenient? How has that become like an altar you'll die on? There's something nuts about it. And that's because it represents something much deeper than itself. Like, we all get that, right? I mean, nobody actually is that upset about a mask. There's something the mask represents for them on both sides that has produced hardness of heart. I'm convinced that's correct. And who started it, I don't know. But I do have a hard time, you know, like, if you read this at surface value, then God basically, some people are puppets, and God will just destroy them and move the machinations. And maybe that's true. And then the puppetry God's using on me is that I don't believe in that puppetry. So I can just sort of blame God for that in the end.
How much relevance is it that the stories that we are reading aren't written down for another several hundred years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And probably whenever they were written, they most certainly are edited in light of the Babylonian exile, right? So they probably have that kind of flair of coming out of bondage on them. Yeah. It's a good point you raised.
Because they would write the story to create a story that would be more readable, that would be more kind of favor. Yes. How long did the Babylonian incident happen after the Moses came out of Egypt?
600 years.
But then and then the first writing didn't take place until under King David or Solomon, right?
That's what we think, which would have been 250, 300 years after the events described herein.
So that'd be 900 years.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
But these are some powerful stories. You know, again, and there are a lot of weird things, but powerful and weird. I mean, there's a lot of this like ironic thing happening in the story. Like, do you notice that the Shifra and Puah say, like, Hebrew women are not like us, which is a really great way you talk to somebody who's racist. You say, like, your racism is correct. The Hebrews are not like us. And as a result, like, our sophisticated ways won't work with them. I mean, that's basically what they do. They play on stereotyping to get out. I mean, that's curious, isn't it? And notice that Moses marries this lady whose father is the high priest of what? of a Canaanite deity. I mean, like the polytheism is all over the place. And this is Moses, like the guy. John, sorry, you got your hand up.
Well, just to comment on that, I think it said that they were, I can't remember the name of the tribe, but they were of Hebrew descent.
Yes. Yeah, but look
So-
what they say. They say not these women are not like us. I mean, it's just so. I mean, oppressed people have been doing that forever, right? Like you're using the category to like get for your benefit. I mean, because there are so few benefits to being in that category, you got to take every single one you can get.
And we even say that now based on our persuasion. They're not like us. But let me make another comment here, if I might. So I made a note to myself to ask this question. Can I read this, please?
Of course.
This is Exodus 4:21, but it's actually 24 that I want to talk about, but 21 sets it up. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles which I have put in your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. And you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says Lord, Israel is my firstborn son, and I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay your firstborn son. Then it says, this is what I don't get. It says, at a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to kill him.
Yeah.
And Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it and said, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, so let him alone. Then it was that she said, you are a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. What is that all about?
You know, that's what we were talking about earlier. It's crazy. And most scholars will tell you this is like a desert spirit, not God, because they believe in just like spirits you have to contend with when you travel. I mean, it is clear in the story that Moses has not circumcised his kids. And why is that the case? And how does Zipporah know to do that? Because she's a Cushite, we learn later. Like she's not Hebrew. So like, how does she know? Did Moses tell her like, God thinks we should do this, but we're not going to do it? And then she remembered. It's sort of strange. And you need to know that when she lays the foreskins on Moses's feet, those aren't his feet. I mean, you know, so like why she's putting the foreskins of his sons on his penis is strange. And how that works is strange.
Now, was Moses, do you think, circumcised?
Well, I don't know. He should have been.
Yeah, well, he was 3 months old, so he should have been.
It is helpful to know the Egyptians circumcised their kids too. The Hebrews seem to have cut more skin off than the Egyptians did.
Yeah. One last thing, Mike, I did notice in the reading that, is it even at all significant that Moses is a Levite?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's okay. So it's significant in that the Levites are the ones who are going to descend from Moses and Aaron, who will be the priests and the keepers of the local shrines. And this is setting up how priests are descendants of Aaron. Moses' people are like the regular Levites, how they're similar and how they're different. Like that's going to come around in the story as you look at their characters a little bit. But, you know, are they like violent people, Moses and Aaron? Yeah. Yeah, they are, just like Levi was, right? I mean, yeah, these aren't like spotless folks.
What the role of women was and all that mess.
You know, it's just helpful to know just a small bit about Egyptian religion. Like the principal deity is like Ra, who's the sun. And depending which myth you read, because there's multiple ones, like Ra gets killed and then resurrects every morning, like spends the night in the underworld, which is why it gets dark, and then comes back up, right? And then like that gets told a different way, that it's Osiris. But Ra has a son called Horus, and Horus is like a falcon, but Horus is also Ra's eye. And sometimes Horus is the sun. This is all very strange, right? It's so like, the other thing is like Ra is the principal deity of Egypt. So Egypt is Ra's son, but Horus is Ra's son. And then the sun goes dark. I mean, that's all of that stuff is operating in the story here, right? Like the plague of darkness is saying that Ra, that God is holding Ra down in the underworld. Extra. Graciela?
Yeah, this is somewhat off of what you're talking about, but I am early on, I think it was John who asked, what was the role of women in this culture? I mean, generally speaking, we're talking about all these men with strange names and doing strange things to their penises and whatever, but it's like, what was the woman's, generally speaking, in the societies, what were their role in? It just seems like they're not there, or, well, please help me.
Yeah, I think probably the best analog would be like from that book, Sisters in the Wilderness, that we read, where, you know, in the American South, women did field work and they did child work and they did domestic service and they cooked, right? So women kind of did everything. And that seems to be the case. Now, like birthing is really confusing. And women have been mostly involved in that for most of history because they're the ones that do that. So you got the midwives. But we also know that women are spending a lot of time making bread every day. And it appears that women are also doing things like raising their children to make bricks, but the way you do that is by making bricks. So I think it's fair to imagine that this story is talking about like total slavery and women do whatever they're told. Right. Now, John did ask what's the role of women in Judaism today? And the answer is it depends. Like if you're Orthodox, women are second-class citizens. They can't sit with their men in the synagogue. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. Being an Orthodox woman's pretty tough. On the other hand, if you're Reform, you not only can you be a rabbi, like you can be a rabbi like a man can be a rabbi and own property and all of that. And if you're conservative, then you're somewhere in between. But it is true that if you're Orthodox, women don't sit next to men in synagogue. They sit in a different spot where they're not to be viewed by men. Usually it's on the second floor and they're kind of veiled. And women can't study the Torah like a man can.
Isn't that the same thing as a mosque?
Yeah, some mosques, and the same thing as being a member of like many Christian denominations where women are categorically inferior to men. And they never say that. What they say is, oh, we're equal, we have different roles. It just happens that your role is inferior to the men's role. This is like Christian double talk. So it just, you know, like it happens all over the place.
It seems to me, we have some very close Jewish friends, and as a result of, you know, knowing some other Jewish people through them, there's not much activity either by the men or the women in the synagogue. They're Jews, they will call themselves Jews, but they're not practicing. Does that?
Yeah, I've heard that, it's going to sound strange when I say it, but maybe 95% of Jewish people are atheistic or agnostic.
Yes, that's been my experience just with personal friends.
But if I were to be really fair, Graziella, I don't know that there's a different percentage in Christianity.
Yes.
Like I know many Christian people who think that they're theist, but yes. You sort of look at the picture, and it's tough.
I think you're right. You go to mass with Christmas and Easter.
Yeah. I didn't say that judgmentally. I just mean comparatively, I think it's similar, you know, and how do you really judge what somebody is or isn't, and like how deep their practice is? I don't know. I do want to point out that in the oldest source of the Bible, that's the J source, this is where you get God's name. And it comes out of this bush. Now, like, it's interesting to think, how many bushes did God burn down before Moses paid attention? Because it's not clear that this was the first bush, right? There could have been many bushes. The other thing that's weird in the text is that, like, sometimes it's a messenger in the bush and sometimes it's God in the bush. And so like most people say is the editor's trying to smooth that out because no one's real comfortable with the idea that like God is in the bush. That just seems like a little bit much to be around and to like live. But the text seems to suggest God is in this bush. And you notice that God looks to see if Moses will pay attention to the bush. Like it's very like very human. Like God's shooting off fireworks, hoping you'll look. I mean, that's sort of how it goes. And it's an interesting exchange, right? Because Moses says a bunch of times, like, no, I don't want to do this. Pick somebody else, not it. And God keeps saying, like, look, no, you don't have a choice. And like, there's another way to do it. It's interesting. A lot of time when you go to like seminary, people talk about, well, look at the call of Moses, and this is how our call to ministry or like call to being good people works. I don't know that it's always the case, but it's an interesting case study. One thing Moses does is he tries to wriggle out of this like a bunch of ways. And one of the ways he wriggles out is, I don't know your name. I'm not convinced Moses expects God to tell him. I just want to be really clear. And then God does this thing, right? God says this name that I don't really think we ought to be saying. And this is the name that God's going to be known for all generations. And what's curious is as soon as God tells Moses the name, Moses changes the name. The way you say I am in Hebrew is with these two sounds that sound more like eh. That's first person plural, first person singular, I am, eh. And Moses uses the third person plural, Yah, which is, again, third person. So Moses says, not I am who I am. Moses says, he is who he is. Now that's interesting, isn't it? It's like, what's the difference between having a first person relationship and a third person relationship? Maybe the whole point of like discipleship and spirituality is to go from a relationship someone told you about to one you actually cultivate yourself. Lila's not sure that God told Moses the name. It is mysterious. What's interesting about it is a lot of like theologians and philosophers are kind of like drawn to the mystery of it, right? Because God's name is like, it just is, it's being, like it's existence. And what's curious about it is like, again, in Hebrew, you can't write that word. So you can't write the word to be ever. I have to say Lila on the screen instead of Lila is on the screen. Or tomorrow I-42. I'm like, that's all you can say. You can't say I will be, because that would be God's name, and you can't say that or write that. And then the other thing is you can't say it and you can't write it, but the rabbis are convinced, like, you're saying it now or you'd be dead. Because it sounds like a breath and you're breathing. And what I love, because we just did the St. Francis thing, right? Is like sometimes we get so focused in like anthropocentrism in the world, like human are the most important things. But like, if you think about it, if God's name is like the animating factor, then the animals all have it too, right? I mean, because they're breathing. And I'm not really stretching to say that the trees are also breathing, because they are. They happen to like discard things that help us, whereas we discard poison for other things, right? But so when you start to think about like what has God's name or breath and what's being sustained, it's kind of is more like everything. John, you're on.
So along those lines, when I was reading this, my thought was, when I believe Moses says, "Who are you?" and God says, "I am who I am," and then later in a different book, it says, God said, "Call me Lord." So my thought was that I am who I am is who God is, and Lord is God's name, which to my mind is different.
Yeah, no, now our Jewish brothers and sisters would disagree. They would say that I am who I am is God's name. And in the Bible, your name is who you are. So it's both and. Now, like at a certain point, and we do think it was like around the Babylonian exile, people decided that God's name was like too holy for human beings to like handle. So we started using aliases. Elohim is one of those aliases if you lived in the South. If you lived in the North, Elohim was God's name, and you didn't say that or write it. That's the interesting bit, right? What most of our Jewish brothers and sisters do, and I thought, man, I should start doing this in our bulletins, because it's a kind of a cool idea anchored to this text. When they write God, they write it like I put in the chat. There's no O, there's an asterisk. Part of that is because Hebrew doesn't have vowels. They all go above and beyond the line. But also it comes back to this name. In Hebrew, it's called the Tetragrammaton, which means the 4 letters. And the way it's normally conceived is YHWH. Those are the 4 consonants. And then you slip in the vowels to give you that Y name. I mean, truly, it should be EHWH. I mean, that's what God says. I am is EH. He is YH. No one in the New Testament gets this except for John, and he only kind of gets it. The Gospel of John is where Jesus says, like, I am the good shepherd. And really what he's saying this word plus good shepherd. And you'll remember when they come to arrest him in the garden, they say, are you Jesus of Nazareth? And he says, I am, and they all fall backward. Because he said this name that is like powerful. I mean, again, like when the commandment says, don't use God's name in vain, it's talking about this word. When you stub your toe and you say, oh God, my toe, you didn't use God's name in vain, biblically speaking. Now, culturally, we just don't understand that God has a name like you and I do. And names just mean something different in the Bible. You do whatever you want with this, but our Jewish brothers and sisters take this so seriously, right? That like they burn scrolls, they don't touch them with their own hand because they perceive the name has this magical quality to it of holiness.
How then does Jesus refer to God?
That's a great question. Usually it's like Father, it's like Abba, but never in the Gospels anyway, never with this word. Nor do I think would he have, because one did not do that. Only like I said, only the Gospel of John has Jesus doing something like this. And you can only do it in Hebrew anyway. You can't pull this off in Greek. The closest in Greek you can say is, I am being, ego eimi, which Jesus says, but that's not God's name. That's like the concept underpinning this. I mean, our Hebrew brothers and sisters are convinced this is not a concept, like this is real. This is God's name, and you don't say it, even though you're saying it.
Why? Why do you not say it? Is it because it's the same concept as you don't want to look at God because you will die?
I think that's part of it, right? I think, and you know, there's this parallel story where David's moving the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, and the cart hits a bump and the Ark rattles. And this guy thinks the Ark's going to fall off the cart, so he runs and steadies the Ark. Like he saves it potentially from falling into the mud. But you know what happens to that guy? He dies instantly. Because not even the priest can touch that thing. God stands on it. I used to be caught up in like the danger of it, but I think really it's really, I think, this idea about like true reverence. And I love both sides of the coin. It's not something you say, and it's something that you're saying right now. It's just like this really interesting bit. But I think the idea, John, is that like the name is so holy that you would defile yourself by invoking it. And yet, the name Jesus in Hebrew, that's Yahshua. You hear at the beginning, the first half of the divine name. In Aramaic, it's Yeshua, right? But I mean, either way, you hear that Yah sound at the beginning. Do you notice that there's some weirdness in the story? God says, I'm going to deliver the people, and here's the proof. After I've done it, you'll come back here. That is not very confirming to me. Moses wants a sign, and God's sign is, yeah, after you do all this, you'll come back here. I mean, Moses wants something now. Would you not also like something now? I mean, that's how the story goes. Oh, I just love Moses says, yeah, look, just please pick somebody else.
But in the story, the Hebrews are making bricks. And I assume this is for houses, because I don't think they were building the pyramids.
Yeah, no, the text says it was for these treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. So it's hard to know, Tim, if this is just domiciles for Egyptians, or this is like bureaucratic centers like granaries and city walls, and it certainly could have been both and. But Pithom and Ramses were real cities, apparently, and they were fortified, and part of the fortifications seemed to be brick walls. But no archaeologist I've heard of thinks that these people were involved in building the pyramids, because first of all, you don't make bricks for that, you quarry them. And second, it's not slave labor, it's extremely technical. Like, you've got to be pretty crafty to build those pyramids. I've been to them, and it's crazy that people made them. You know, nobody seems to really have a totally convincing theory on how they were even made. My father-in-law thinks it was aliens that did it, which is great. But when you go and look at these, you know, like 2-ton rocks that are quarried and laid relatively seamlessly before they were iron tools, it's kind of impressive.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
In the write-up in Disciple, it mentions that they say that the pyramids were built before this took place.
Yeah, most everybody thinks that.
Yeah.
And but I grew up in Sunday school hearing that the slaves built the things. Is one of the benefits of not having Sunday school is that you don't learn all of that silly stuff. Well, on the other hand, you don't necessarily learn the story either. So, but Bridegroom of Blood, I guarantee you'll never hear that story on the flannel board, nor does it appear in the Revised Common Lectionary for a Sunday reading. It just doesn't show up there. You only get it when you read the Daily Office, which takes you through the Bible in 2 years. But on Sundays, the compilers of the lectionary just didn't think this was going to be edifying. If I had to preach on the story, I don't even know what I'd say. This is a weird story. Because it's weird. You notice that Pharaoh's a polytheist, right? And he says to Moses, I don't know your God. Like, you're telling me your God's saying to let you go, but I don't know that one. And Moses says, if we don't go to offer sacrifices in the wilderness, our God will attack us. I don't know if you read that. That's a weird thought, isn't it? And Moses seems to be trying to like trick Pharaoh. Hey, we just want to go worship for 3 days. And Pharaoh's like, well, okay, you can do that as long as the ladies stay home. Well, no, all of us have to go. Okay, you can go if you leave your livestock. No, we all need to go. I mean, it seems really clear Moses will not be coming back. so why he keeps this like ruse that we're going to go do this sacrifice and come back is beyond me. It's not effective, right? I mean, Pharaoh understands he's asking for a one-way ticket. Ellen or Mary, how about you? I want to make sure I give you airtime.
Well, I really appreciate all of the input that you guys have done, because I didn't study hard enough to give anything of value, but I do love the fact that women, even from back in the early times of history, have been important and fulfilled important roles. They were very important to Jesus, and we don't often think about that. Those of us who haven't studied with these other books before. And it also strikes me as that the men come across as pretty stupid, you know? It's like, okay, here's this baby that came out of the rushes and suddenly appears, and there's no questions about why. Maybe it's because they have so many kids they don't know. I don't know. But I mean, there were really weird thoughts that came to me as I was reading through it. And it's like, none of it makes any sense anyway. So I just don't have anything worthwhile to add.
I mean, you notice that the animals end up dying a bunch of times, right? There's the plague on the animals, and then the hail hits them, but they were already dead. And then there's boils, but they were already dead and crushed by hail. I mean, like, it's really strange. And maybe it's just sort of saying, you know, sort of like, I remember when I watched Pee Wee Herman's Big Adventure when I was like 5. Like, first we're going to tattoo him, then we're going to stomp him, then we're going to hang him, then we're going to kill him, then we're going to burn him. It's like, well, the first go around probably took care of him, but you just continue on doing this, right? So the images of just total destruction.
So John, that's why I really appreciate the comments that you've made, because it had so much depth to it. So thanks.
Mike,
Yes.
are following up on what Ellen said, are there physical differences between the Egyptians and the Hebrews so that you would know who was who?
Well, one difference is apparently Egyptians were clean shaven and Hebrews weren't. So pretty much if somebody had a beard, probably Hebrew. You know, when you think about, like, were there like ethno-racial differences? I think they would have been relatively mild. Now we're going to turn out, there's actually an important thing that happens in the book of Numbers regarding Moses's wife, because Aaron and Miriam get jealous at Moses, and they can't find anything wrong with Moses. So instead they pick on his wife, and they ridicule Moses for having married a Cushite, which could mean a lot of things, but it certainly could mean somebody who's dark-skinned. So this could be one of those images of like race, but it doesn't seem like race plays a lot into the Exodus story. The Hebrews, I remember the Egyptians won't eat with the Hebrews because they think they're gross, but that probably has to do with both their beards and their nomadic, like, shepherding, and not that they have different blood in them. That's just a pretty foreign concept.
Well, what I'm thinking about is when Moses was a baby or a child, would he look any different than the rest of Pharaoh's household?
Great question. Probably not significantly. I think probably the Pharaoh's sister is pretty able to figure out why there's a baby in a basket in the Nile. I mean, like that's not a normal thing mothers do. Although when you think about it, Moses's mother does take Pharaoh's command quite literally. She has a baby boy and throws him in the Nile. It's just that he's also in a floating basket, right? It's interesting how she passively aggressively obeys the command. She does put the baby in the Nile.
Hey,
Hey, Mary.
I'm sorry I had to hop on late. I was up at the kids' school again. But I may have missed this, but you know, my husband and I were just talking about this, but with the plagues, I'm sorry if this was in the first 30 minutes, whatever, but there's this sense of, God overpowering like the Egyptian gods.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know, because I was looking at, and I think you referenced this before, I'm pretty sure you did, Mike, how there was in the Bible, and do we see this in the writers of the story, that they had, maybe they were holding on to an underlying belief that there were multiple gods. Did you say this already? I think you said this already, that they held on to that they did believe that there were multiple gods, but that God was like the foremost God.
Yeah, that seems to be the case.
Okay. And so what year, because I think you said this too, but when do we see like this pivot to like, oh, all those other gods actually don't exist, that we see that in the in the writing and the scripture. And then it's like, because I was trying to think about that idea of like if you are in Egypt at this time, you're influenced by all those other gods so much that, like, I think just on a personal level, it'd be really hard to be like, no, they're not real. They're not real. So were they kind of holding to this both belief, like, okay, maybe they're real, or no, we think they're real? Like, what do you think their mindset was regarding the Egyptian gods?
My best guess is that they did think that those gods were real and that they were like on the home turf of those gods.
That's what they thought. Okay.
That's what I think. Because even when you read like the Decalogue, or what we usually sadly call the 10 Commandments, the first command is have no other gods before me.
Right.
Just listen to that language. It doesn't mean there aren't any other ones. It just means don't put them before me. So does that mean I can put them after you? Or does that mean I shouldn't put them anywhere? I mean, there's some ambiguity in that phrase.
Right. Yeah, I just wondered, because I thought the same thing. And I was just thinking about, well, Moses, though, if he saw, or experienced the one God, was he like, y'all, there's no other God, because he had that powerful, I don't know. I get so much into it. I just like to think back about what the life of faith for those early believers, and sort of that tension that we hold now still, and the mystery. And like now, I have like Christians who are adamant that I'm like, no, it's always been that there's one God and all those other gods didn't matter. Like they didn't care. And I was like, I think they thought about him a lot. Like, I think that was part of their thought, because that was all around them. And then they were constantly being told like not to worship idols. Like it was like just this eradication. So I just, maybe that was their battle back then, with like all the different gods. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair, but I think, Mary, to be even like more extension, I'm not convinced that people who think they're monotheist are as monotheist as they think they are. Because when we talk about these gods with a small g, we're really talking about something that is like, that has some reality that's metaphysical. And I'm going to tell you, like, nationalism has some metaphysical reality, because like you look what mobs do, and it's something greater than the individual parts. Now, I don't think it's like a god, but I do think when the scripture talks about things like powers and principalities, right? And like that there's something like metaphysical about stuff.
Yeah.
It's, like this, like the synergy is just too great to like, like you just can't reduce everything to just pure physicality, I think is the thinking, right? I mean, like, that's why things like inequity are so difficult, because they're not like, it's not like we can just course correct that. Like there's some kind of like deeper type or imprint. When you talk about things like caste or race, it's not like you can just create a bunch of legislation and that'll make it go away.
Sure. I think it's just, I just think it's fascinating to think about like how we now present day are like trying to find and discern the one true God, and like just looking at these people like grapple with that, and like, and in the midst of like so much culture saying that there wasn't, I don't know. It gives me, I guess it comforts me a little bit, because I think I've always thought of like, oh, they were so faithful, and they killed the lamb and they did the Passover thing and all that kind of stuff. But just to think like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure they had doubts. I bet they had a lot of doubts.
And they didn't just have doubts. They had little clay statues of a big-breasted woman called Asherah that they buried in their fields.
Right. Okay.
And they did both things. Maybe you could say they were trying to hedge their bets, right? Like better safe than sorry. But like even that point is like, well, then there's some power to this.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
I mean, when you read the Hebrew Bible through, notice that they clean out the temple, but then they have to clean it again and again and again and again and again. And you don't have to tell somebody like, don't have idols if they already don't have idols. Like that would be a useless thing to tell them, right? You only tell people to not have something that they're actively doing, right? Like if I told you, stop killing your mother-in-law, you probably don't need to hear that from me because it's unlikely you've killed your mother-in-law. On the other hand, you know what I mean? Like a prohibition only makes sense if you got to struggle with it. So when you read like the kosher food laws and it says, listen, don't eat the bunny or the horse or the rock badger. Like when the scripture goes to pain to tell you not to eat those particular animals, well, it's because people were eating those animals. I mean, like, like otherwise, why waste the airtime?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just the context, that shift of like how we're always trying to discern what's the ancient world context and how do we read the Bible nowadays in light of like our context. Anyway, I'm thinking out loud. Thank you.
I know, I appreciate it. And I think actually, instead of us saying like, well, all these silly people, look how humans have evolved, we understand now that there's just like one God. I think it's really fair to say like, sometimes we diminish the spirituality of other things to our detriment. By being so monotheist, we forget that there are like metaphysical things, and like, it's really, I just had to write this article. I didn't have to. I got invited to write an article on pet blessings for the Galveston, whatever the thing is. And it says, does your church do pet blessings? And what do pets mean to you? And what about pets in the Bible? And so like, as I grew up, animals don't have souls. Like I learned that they don't have souls. And what I wrote to the article is, well, people don't have souls either. According to the Bible, people are souls, and your soul is your amalgam of your emotions and your body and your spirit and everything left over. Right. And so strictly speaking, yeah, no one has a soul. That's great. So are animals souls? Well, I could just be my own thinking, but I sure think my dog has got a ghost in the machine. And pretty much everybody I know that's ever had an animal that they've chosen to love believes there's a ghost in the machine. And so it's really interesting to say like, oh no, animals are just chemical hardware and they just do exactly what they're told. But that's not my experience with animals, actually. It's not. Like, again, there's a ghost in the machine, and sometimes they go against their programming, or they live into their programming even when it's very detrimental to them. And so I'm just speaking roundaboutly to say like there's spirituality for me in animals. And I've been places in the world that also seem to have a very palpable spirit. Like it's just, and I don't believe there's like wood sprites living there. Like that's not the language I would use, but there is like some kind of resonance that's happened in certain spots. And if I didn't say that, I'd be denying my own experience. Now, my experience could be wrong, but it has been very real. I don't know if that makes sense. But again, like if you want to start talking about spirituality or monotheism, you start talking about partisan politics and you will find allegiance to other gods. I'm just going to be really clear. Even if you think you're right, which of course everybody thinks they're right. Nobody picks a position so they can be wrong. Nobody says like, well, I don't want to wear a mask because I love being wrong. I mean, nobody says that. It's a sticky wicket because there's some like spiritual obedience going on to what I don't know always, but to something. So I don't know anybody that's a monotheist. I'm just going to be honest. And I'm not sure that monotheism that says that there's nothing metaphysical in the world. I'm not even sure, not only, I know that's not biblical, but I'm not even sure it's a helpful way to live. Like thinking about there being metaphysical things in people and places, that actually seems a little more helpful. And actually, like if I'll pay attention to the spirits, and I'm not talking about deities, or like I said, I'm not talking about like ogres or trolls. I'm talking about there being more than meets the eye. That seems like helpful. I don't know if and I don't know what to do with that. Again, I'm not going to give it the name of a deity. I'm not going to personify it, but I am going to say there's more than meets the eye.
Well, that's like, I think that's, oh, sorry, John, you raised your hand. Are you raising your hand right now? Sorry. John,
I can wait, Mary, until you're finished.
No. Well, I just wanted to say that was, and I'm freezing up now, I think. But that was the deconstruction of my faith when I realized, like, with the pandemic and everything, like all the bipartisan politics and all of the confusion and the different allegiances and the various beliefs that people hold about the one true God, yes. And how we've all fashioned him in a certain sense to be, who we want him to be, I guess. But I feel like that even in the Bible, there is this sense of like, there's room for that there's something behind the curtain that we can't see fully, so there is this spiritual realm that we don't see. And I'm with you, Mike, I've been places where I've definitely been like, there's a presence here, stronger than other places. But I think just having the permission, y'all, in this space to like question that and be like, to think about these human beings, ancient human beings, like writing and trying to sort through the meaning, and just sort of see them as like humans, but inspired and spiritual and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, you go, John. Thank you.
I guess my thought when you mentioned one true God was, do we think that all of us who believe in a God on this planet worship, if you will, the same God? That is, do we believe that the Muslim God, the Hindu God, and maybe even Buddha, although Buddha's, if I understand it, is God on earth, that it's the same God that we Christians are worshiping? And I don't know.
There's 3 parts to one God.
John, some people do sort of say that, and I do think like the really like cautionary thing to say is like, oh, you Jewish people, you are just really worshiping the one God we know about the whole time, and just in your ignorance you didn't know you were doing that. Right? I mean, like that's what I hear sometimes Christian folk doing, is saying like, well, we've got the truth, but you've got some watered down version with it that could be close enough for you. And there's that Hindu story, right, about people who are blindfolded grabbing the elephant. And it is all the same elephant, but depending on where they are in the elephant, that's their experience. So I don't know. I mean, I think I guess it depends on you and like what you're most comfortable with. I do know that we should tread lightly when we're talking to people of other faiths and about how we perceive their faith and their faithfulness. Oh, you're just worshiping our God with different language. It's very patronizing, to be honest, because they could very well say the same thing to us and we probably wouldn't appreciate that statement, right? It's just you always think about how would it feel if that were inverted. Nonetheless, I do think we could say, I mean, again, it depends who you are, but like, look, if if God is really transcendent and larger than human language, then probably like multiple, there's probably not one simple way to encompass all experience of God. And I will tell you, like in the Western tradition, my mentoring priest said one time that he had to take calculus in college to graduate. And the first go around, he made rubbish of it. And then the second time when he actually studied, his conclusion was the calculus was just a language, a way of interfacing with a number of parts of the world. And what he said was that, what religion, and in his opinion, what Christianity offered people was a language like calculus that delivered you from the disk and washer method to power rule and the Riemann sum, which I've got to say, the disk and washer method stinks. Like, glad I had to learn that only because I didn't have to keep doing it, right? So like his thinking was like, what does the church really offer people is a language for interfacing with the God that's already there in their experience and in the world, and a story that they can resonate with. And essentially his conclusion was like Judaism and Islam did those things too. And I think what's really interesting, I've thought about this a lot, Gandhi was close to converting to Christianity, but ultimately he did not, because it was his second language. His first language was Hinduism. And like essentially what Gandhi said is, your job, your invitation is to practice as faithfully whatever tradition you're born into. And I don't want to like push that too far, but I will say that there's some beautiful things in Islam and there's some beautiful things in Judaism. And truth be told, like I've got a little bit of envy in some of those practices, but those are second and third languages for me. So I'm not convinced I'll ever speak them fluently. And I don't think that I've upset the Lord Jesus by saying what I just said. Because at the end of the day, that guy wasn't Christian. That guy was Jewish. Which is really funny, right? That Christians, that anti-Semitism comes from Christians when like the Lord was a Semite. Like it's just very odd. So going back to it, I think like, I don't know, I think sometimes we oversimplify things to our detriment, and probably because it serves our own people group in power. And there's this great sage, Gregory of Nazianzus, who says, concepts create idols, only wonder really knows. And I think that's interesting, because as a kid, I was taught about the cults and other religions and what's wrong with them, instead of curiosity and wonder. And I feel like I missed out. And I'm going to be a priest. That's what I'm going to do. Because that's just my native tongue.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Going back to the Egyptian story and and how Moses had all these plagues on the Egyptians. Could this also be interpreted as the steps we take to get to Christianity or to our faith, that we have to go through 10 plagues or a number of them before we find?
It's an interesting read, Tim, and I have to admit that I'm not sure that we ever have to. I just think more often than not we do. I'm always short to make something a prescription that just describes me very well. And again, like I don't think that we have to do like Moses and say like, God, I'm not interested. I don't want to do this. Find somebody else. I just think we often do. So I feel like what the scriptures do is they describe us much better than they prescribe us. But I think the prescription comes from the description. I think the prescription comes from, hey, the next time God's asking you to help get people out of bondage, don't tarry, just go ahead. Just go ahead. Why wait? And I don't know if you've ever felt like this, Tim, like a lot of times in my life, like I've known really good things I ought to be doing. And when I say ought, I mean, not because like I'm trying to curry favor with God, but because like I want to live into my values. Like I know certain things and I'll know them for years and not do them. And then one day, like some kind of straw will drop on my back and break it in the right direction. And I'll start doing or taking seriously what I always made headspace for before. Now, it happens less often than I'd like, but it's almost always the case that I just start doing something I already knew I wanted to be doing anyway. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I think it happens with less often because a lot of it has already been done.
That could be. That could be. And so maybe that's the trick, right? Is like what we're doing is laying a foundation for what can come next.
Yes.
And another question is, well, do we actually need our foundation to be, do we need to be as slow as we'll settle for? Or could we come up with a sturdy foundation a little faster, like for our own good?
Well, I think everyone goes through a process. Some take longer, some do it quicker, some never do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And so I think that's where like holding that space out allows me to be maybe more compassionate for other people. Like, why aren't they doing things like as fast as I think they should? And the answer is maybe they're building up their foundation. Now, some people need a really big foundation, let me tell you. But in some areas of my life, I do too. And that's that discipline from Ignatius of Loyola, right? Which essentially like it boils down to people are doing the best they can with what they have. And if you want them to be able to do more with what they have, you need to give them more, not demand more from them, give them more.
I think that's really important. The concept that people are doing the best they can with what they have. In general, I think that's true. And it helps me, not always successful, but it helps me to be less judgmental.
And I think the hardest part about it, from all the research I'm familiar with, the hardest thing, biggest obstacle to accepting that is whether we believe we're doing the best we can with what we have. And I usually don't. So
neither do I.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty common though.
We tend to judge others like we judge ourselves. That's the bottom line. So the more we can give or extend ourselves that grace, the more we can extend it to others. I'm glad we got there talking about Exodus. I do want to say there's these funny bits about the story. Moses has to take his shoes off. It's just really quite interesting. You take your shoes off on holy ground. I've heard a lot of thoughts on this, like, hey, because when you keep sheep, you step in sheep poop. So even though floors are made out of dirt, you don't track in field poop into people's homes. So you leave your shoes outside the tent, even though it's all dirt. Maybe, I guess I just sort of think about this interesting bit about, like, you know, when the human beings eat this fruit and they know stuff, they realize they're naked and they're ashamed and they want to cover themselves. And it's really interesting to think about, like, in holy places, like you can take your armor off, even if those are your shoes, like you're called to take your armor off.
Well, like whenever we were in India and we went to Catholic church, you had to take off your shoes to
Yes.
enter into the church.
Yes.
Yeah, we certainly did.
I intended, when I got this carpet, to celebrate the Eucharist barefoot every week. It's just that it would take a lot of time for me to be pulling my shoes and socks off and putting them back on in the service. One day, maybe I'll just build up to it, because it's what I would really like to do, because of this story. It happens again where Joshua meets the commander of the Lord's army, which, by the way, is the Lord. And the commander of the Lord's army says, take your shoes off, in the middle of nowhere.
Can't you just wear sandals?
No, I need ankle support. I got a bad ankle, so I
Oh.
kind of have to wear lace-up shoes all the time. I know clogs would be great, except I got the bad ankle. So no, it's a struggle. I'm hard to help, John. I mean, you know this about me. I've got this great idea, but it's hard to do it because of the mechanics. But whatever, we'll get there one day.
I grew up in a household where my parents, and my grandmothers would have us take our shoes off before we came in. We came in the house, there was a rug, we took our shoes off, and then, you know, it's just, and we're Hispanic. Now, I don't know, it didn't have anything to do with that, or just that, those families, those two families did that to keep the house clean.
Yeah.
Because, and to respect the work that the women were doing in the house. It was kind of more like that, a respect of that work.
You know, it's still true in places like Alaska, which get real muddy. You leave your shoes in the front door. It's still true in the Middle East, right?
Okay,
And
yeah.
part of it's cleanliness, but I want to suggest there's another bit about intimacy as well.
Yes,
You know, a lot of homes in the Northeast have what are called mud rooms.
Yes.
yes,
Where you
yeah.
can go in and you take off your muddy shoes. But I kind of like the concept you mentioned a moment ago, which is when you when you enter a house and you take your shoes off, you're entering into a safe place.
Yeah.
yes.
I guarantee you it's supposed to mean that in the Middle East today. It's a sign of hospitality and vulnerability and like acceptable vulnerability.
And it was very, very much acceptance and gratitude for whoever the women were, the parent, my mother, my grandmother, that were doing the work to maintain the house. And it was respect for that too. For it was honor for their work.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful you grew up. I did not grow up that way. And like I say, I have a hard time doing it now because of my ankle. I'm grateful for you coming on Tuesday. I want to respect your time. Next week, we'll be back on Wednesday with chapter 10. And we can circle back to some of this if you want, because these stories are wild. I mean, they're so rich, these stories. In some ways, they define like the rest of scripture for me. But anyway, thanks for being here. And I will see you all next Wednesday.
I've got one last.
Oh, yeah, please.
You were reading St. John of the Cross.
Oh, yeah, like last year.
Yeah. So what did you think of it?
I think he's an Enneagram 4. He's one of those tortured, melancholy artist types like myself. Yeah, there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of depth and a lot of melancholy. We'll have a real conversation about him later, Tim. Okay, see you all.
Bye-bye.